deeper still, and things are starting to heat up. As I haphazardly tunnel my way through a chronology of a genre, I'm finding this more and more tiresome to deal with than the physical labor of actually digging. I'm also wondering how much longer I can stretch out this metaphor, as this is the third video utilizing it. But I'm guessing I can at least bleed it for one more. So if you're new to this series or channel, I'd recommend starting off at the beginning before getting into it with this, because this isn't your average run-of-the-mill review. I'm using this as a segue to talk about Isekai as a whole, propping this up as an example to clarify and expand on this trend. And where I've looked at history and parody, I thought I'd focus more on popularity this time around, and specifically how said popularity influences an entire medium. That's right, this time around I'm looking at No Game No Life to sort of piece it into this puzzle. Now that we know what Isekai is and how it's evolved, let's nail down a bit better how it's stagnating. I mean, keeping its audiences glued to their seats through painful repetition. Or who knows, maybe I'm in for it this time around and it'll surprise me with innovation. And sure enough, I'm thinking we'll get a bit of that with this series. So, No Game No Life, starting its life as an easy multiple choice joke for the audience to fail, as it actually goes against the trend thus far. Web novel? Not this time. I did say there may be room for innovation, and this series actually began as a light novel by a shockingly accomplished writer. Not even his first project, as he worked on a light novel adaptation of A Dark Rabbit Has 7 Lives, before striking out on No Game No Life, and even later, Clockwork Planet. The original light novel run is, at the time this video is recording, ongoing from 2012 to present day. Why am I not calling this an inspiration to the genre? Probably because it's a bit more creative and doesn't follow the established trends, hinting to me that this is what an isekai can look like when handled by a talented writer. But to add insult to injury, while this is boasting a 2012 publish date, it's still the oldest anime I've looked at in this series thus far, rocking a 2014 release, with a manga mucking about between those, adapted by the original writer and his wife. Talk about a clusterfuck of continuity shoved out to awaiting fans in a short period of time. And this was absurdly popular, selling millions of copies as both a light novel and anime. Hell, due to its unabashed branding as an isekai mixed with that 2014 release date, right before the modern boom, it possibly kicked off the gold rush of isekai by selling so well. In the years directly following, Isekai became a full-blown phenomenon, taking up a number of releases each season. But correlation doesn't mean causation. I can't definitively prove that No Game No Life is the reason we're flooded with isekais each season these days, but I can certainly insinuate. Alright, so No Game No Life. A show marking the transitionary period between the video game-centered escapism of dot hack and SAO to physical transportation escapism like, take your pick. And being in that transitionary period, much like the last show we looked at, this one seems to have defined the genre and the trends it set, while having twists on them that seem to have been abandoned. Let's look at those in depth. A brother and sister end up sent to this other world, but was it because they died or for reasons? More like a local god got bored and wanted some company. Rather than a dumb mistake, reincarnation, or a random act of God, they're pulled in by an act of a random god. There's a distinction there, trust me. Are they otaku losers? Yeah, but that background kind of informs why they were chosen for this task. Are they overpowered? Absolutely. Mentally dancing circles around everyone with their savant-level intellect. Is it a fantasy world? Well, of course it is, but it's a mishmash of different varieties governed by simple rules that keep it cohesive. A quirk to the reality that becomes the thread to follow for the audience. So we're already on some familiar ground with this series that cinches it out of the gate. This is an isekai. Or at least those would make it an escapist fantasy show. My main defining point for an isekai is characters going to these other worlds to turn them upside down, conforming them to their sensibilities rather than acclimating and becoming part of the world and story forming organically. So what do you expect from a show about a pair of gaming geniuses going to a world governed by games? Let's just go ahead and check that off right now. But where it fits into some of the basics of the genre, It seems to hint at some of the more concerning trends too, like still having access to modern technology like a smartphone, a complete lack of shits about returning / happy being in their new world, the gratuitous fan service seems borderline abusive given the power dynamics, and this sort of sense that the entire setting begins to revolve around the protagonist as soon as they show up. That's not to say a story shouldn't revolve around the main characters, but when their big dick energy sways everything around them, it comes off as blatant wankery. Like, say, seducing a princess via borderline mind control 2 episodes in, or becoming a king, or challenging a god. That sort of stuff stretches my suspension of disbelief, and many isekais do that sort of thing pretty early on. But I'll give this one some slack there, because where it stands out most likely is the world building, a trait I see more often in these early shows than the modern examples. It's a fantasy world, but it's a fantasy world governed by 10 unbreakable rules that inform a lot about personal interactions, social dynamics, and hierarchy. Rather than just being a sort of generic fantasy world, it's one that had a lot of thought put into it, and it's why I can't write this off as just an isekai. Hopefully that sates the fans' bloodlust. This tells me that the author didn't just see some web novels being written on some site and think to himself, I can do that. This is one where there was an attempt at telling a story using some elements that were on the cusp of being trendy. It's clearly a story about a NEET and his sister finding where they belong, instead of some hapless romp to another world to make it their own for a bit before coming back or ruling it. So we see all these tropes that are used in this series that are obligatory in modern isekai. But as I said in my video about Gate, what we're looking at here is like a prototype. Due to this show's chronological placement in the timeline of anime, it's the trial run for a lot of what we see today. I don't think this was the first series to utilize what I've talked about, as SAO did essentially the same thing, but this feels like a roadmap for what would become isekai in the coming years. It branched out to sending these characters to these other worlds rather than them existing as a subset of our own, as programs or such, to the point they can't actually return when they want. In essence, I think this anime, while not pioneering these aspects, hit at a pivotal moment. It struck while the iron was hot, so to speak, combining these elements in just the right way, fresh off the heels of SAO's massive industry-shifting success, filling the commercial void for this sort of story amidst the brewing web novel underground, and arguably propelling many of these into production as the anime market took notice of the success. Selling over 3 million copies as a light novel, and seeing similar success in the home release market for anime. If a show like No Game No Life hadn't happened when it did, would we see so many following the same formula? Sure, there were isekai like Gate and SAO, but those were the Homo erectus of the species. Now we're looking at the first bona fide Homo sapien to make its mark. They're isekais, but markedly different from what we think in the genre, due to their experimentations and deviations from the trend, be it a love story taking place in a video game, or propaganda masquerading as storytelling. Where I said those earlier shows were the roadmaps and prototypes, this one is flat out a mold to copy by streamlining the whole process. But I can't say I'm gonna bash this series for it. I don't think the writers, publishers, and studio designed this series to allow so many others to copy and paste into its formula. No Game No Life isn't the first modern isekai, nor is it probably the one everyone thinks of when they imagine the genre. But looking back, I'd say its influences are definitely felt to this day. Whether that's good or bad is yet to be seen, because there's a certain show I've yet to cover but suspect was the definitive shark jumping moment. Oh yeah, it's coming. Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and do all that other YouTube stuff because that really helps me out. Thanks for watching.